The rain falls heavy over Florence on this October evening, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of reflected neon and shadow. It's the kind of rain that feels like punishment, cold and relentless, washing away everything but memory. Marco Vitale stands at the window of his penthouse apartment overlooking the Arno River, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. At 42 years old, he looks like a man who has lived several lifetimes, all of them painful. His reflection in the rain-streaked glass shows a face marked by violence and grief. A scar runs from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a turf war 3 years ago. His dark hair, once meticulously styled, now falls carelessly across his forehead, threaded with premature silver. But it's his eyes that tell the real story, dark, hollow, empty of anything resembling hope. They are the eyes of a man who died inside long ago, even though his body continued breathing, fighting, surviving. 10 years. It has been exactly 10 years since the explosion that took everything from him. 10 years since Elena Russo, the woman who had been his light in a world of darkness, was supposedly killed in a car bombing meant for him. The Moretti family had planted the device under his Mercedes, but Elena had borrowed his car that morning to run an errand. By the time Marco realized what had happened, there was nothing left but twisted metal and flames that reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. He had identified her remains through a bracelet, a delicate silver chain with a small heart pendant he had given her on their first anniversary. That bracelet had survived the inferno when nothing else did. He kept it in a locked drawer in his desk, though he could not bring himself to look at it. Some wounds are too deep to examine directly. In the years that followed, Marco transformed from a mid-level underboss into something darker, something colder. He hunted down every member of the Moretti organization involved in the bombing. It took him 3 years, but he found them all. The streets of Florence ran red with his vengeance, and when it was over, the Moretti family was nothing but a name in the history of organized crime. But revenge, Marco discovered, is a hollow victory. It filled none of the emptiness inside him. Tonight, he has a meeting with his lieutenant, Dante, at a small cafe in the San Frediano district. It's routine business, territory disputes, protection payments, the mundane machinery of organized crime that continues regardless of personal tragedy. Marco doesn't want to go. He never wants to go anywhere anymore. But discipline has kept him alive this long, so he puts on his black overcoat, checks the Beretta in his shoulder holster, and steps out into the rain. The streets of Florence are beautiful even in their darkness. Ancient buildings lean toward each other like conspirators, their shuttered windows hiding centuries of secrets. The cafe, Il Ritrovo, sits on a narrow street corner, its warm light spilling onto the wet pavement like an invitation. Marco arrives 15 minutes early as always, and takes a table in the back corner where he can watch the entrance. The cafe is nearly empty at this hour. An elderly man reads a newspaper near the window. A young couple shares a dessert, lost in each other's eyes with the oblivious intensity of new love. Marco feels nothing watching them. Not envy, not nostalgia, nothing. Emotion is a luxury he can no longer afford. He orders an espresso he won't drink and checks his phone. Dante has sent a message saying he's running late, caught in traffic on the Ponte Vecchio. Marco sets the phone down and lets his eyes drift around the cafe, noting exits, blind spots, potential threats. It's automatic now, this constant assessment of danger. He has lived this way for so long that he's forgotten any other way to exist. And then the door opens. A woman steps inside, shaking rain from an umbrella. She's wearing a long burgundy coat, her dark hair shorter than he remembers, falling just to her shoulders. She moves with a familiar grace as she approaches the counter, and something in Marco's chest, something he thought had died a decade ago, suddenly clenches with impossible recognition. She orders something. The barista nods. She turns slightly, and Marco sees her profile, the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, the way she tucks her hair behind her ear with her left hand, a gesture so achingly familiar that time seems to collapse in on itself. It cannot be. His mind rejects what his eyes are showing him. Elena Russo died 10 years ago in a fireball that left nothing but ash in that silver bracelet. He identified her remains. He attended her funeral. He has spent a decade living in the tomb of her absence. But this woman, this impossible woman, has Elena's face. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. Marco's hand, reaching for his espresso cup, freezes halfway. His heart, which has beaten with mechanical regularity for 10 years, suddenly hammers against his ribs like it's trying to escape. Every muscle in his body has gone rigid. He cannot breathe. He cannot think. He can only stare as this ghost from his past takes her coffee and turns toward the seating area. Their eyes meet. The world stops. Her face goes pale, all color draining from her cheeks as if she's seen something that shouldn't exist. The coffee cup trembles in her hand. Her lips part slightly, forming words that don't come. For a moment that stretches into eternity, they simply stare at each other across the small cafe. A dead woman and the man who has mourned her for a decade. Then she drops the cup. It shatters on the tile floor, coffee spreading like dark blood, and she turns and runs. The door slams open and she's gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Marco is on his feet before conscious thought catches up to instinct. He throws money on the table and bursts through the door into the downpour. The street is nearly empty, but he catches a glimpse of Burgundy turning a corner 2 blocks ahead. He runs, his dress shoes slipping on wet cobblestones, his breath coming in ragged gasps that have nothing to do with physical exertion. He rounds the corner into a narrow alley. She's there, pressed against a wall, her chest heaving, mascara running down her face in black tears that mix with the rain. When she sees him, something breaks in her expression. Grief and joy and terror, all colliding at once. Marco stops 10 feet away. If he gets closer, if he reaches out and she's not real, if this is some kind of hallucination born from a decade of grief and guilt, he thinks it might finally destroy what little remains of his sanity. His voice, when he finally finds it, comes out broken and raw. The words that need to be said hang in the air between them, unspoken but understood. She takes a step toward him, then another, and when she's close enough that he can see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the same eyes that haunted his dreams for 10 years, she speaks. Her voice is exactly as he remembers it, soft and slightly hoarse, as if she too has spent years crying. And in that moment, everything Marco thought he knew about the past decade shatters like the coffee cup on the cafe floor. They don't speak in the alley. Words feel impossible, inadequate for the magnitude of what is happening. Instead, Elena gestures toward a nearby church, Santa Maria del Carmine, its Baroque facade dark and imposing in the rain. The church is closed for the evening, but Elena knows a side entrance that leads to a small courtyard used by the priests. They slip inside, out of the rain, into a space surrounded by ancient stone walls that have witnessed countless confessions and secrets. Marco cannot stop staring at her. His hands ache with the need to touch her, to verify that she is real, solid, flesh and blood and not some phantom conjured by his grief-broken mind. But he keeps his distance, afraid that contact will break whatever fragile spell is holding this moment together. Elena leans against the courtyard wall, her arms wrapped around herself, and finally begins to speak. Her story comes out in fragments, disjointed and painful, like she's excavating memories she buried deep for survival. She tells him that she did not die in the explosion 10 years ago. There was a bomb, yes, planted under Marco's Mercedes exactly as he remembered, but Elena never got into that car. She had been approached 2 days before by FBI agents working with Italian authorities on a major RICO case against organized crime families in Florence. They knew about the planned hit on Marco. They knew Elena was in danger simply by being close to him. The agents gave her an impossible choice. Enter witness protection immediately, disappear completely, let everyone including Marco believe she died in the bombing they knew was coming, or stay, and likely die for real when the next attempt came. They showed her evidence, photographs of other Mafia girlfriends and wives who had been killed, their bodies displayed as warnings. They told her that as long as Marco's enemies knew she existed, she would be a target, a vulnerability to exploit, a wound to tear open whenever they wanted to hurt him. The agents offered her a new life, a new identity, complete disappearance. But there was one absolute condition: no contact with Marco, ever. If he knew she was alive, he would search for her, and that search would lead his enemies straight to her. The only way to keep both of them safe was for her to become a ghost. Elena refused at first. The thought of letting Marco believe she was dead felt like a cruelty she couldn't inflict. But the agents were insistent, and they played their final card. They told her that Marco's position in the organization made him untouchable as long as he appeared strong and invulnerable. But grief, they explained, makes men reckless. If she stayed, his love for her would be the weakness his enemies needed to destroy him. Her death, even a false one, would be painful, but it would also harden him, make him dangerous in ways that would ensure his survival. So Elena made the most agonizing decision of her life. She agreed to disappear. The agent staged the explosion with a body from the morgue, used Elena's bracelet to ensure identification, and orchestrated the whole terrible theater of her death while Elena watched from a safe house, crying until she had no tears left. She tells Marco about the years that followed, how she was relocated to Portland, Oregon, given a new name, Sarah Mitchell, and a backstory as a bookstore manager who had moved from Chicago, how she lived in a small apartment overlooking the Willamette River, working at Powell's City of Books, existing but not really living, how she cut her hair and changed her style, trying to become someone else while knowing that Elena Russo still lived inside her like a ghost, possessing her own body. But the hardest part, she explains, was the watching. Despite the warnings, despite the rules, Elena found ways to keep track of Marco. She created fake social media accounts, followed Italian news sources, even paid an information broker for occasional updates. She watched from across an ocean as Marco descended into his darkness. She saw the news reports about the bloody war he waged against the Moretti family. She read about the bodies found in the Arno River, the burned-out buildings, the territory disputes that left Florence looking like a war zone. She watched the man she loved transform into something harder, colder, more dangerous, and she hated herself for it. Every death he caused, every scar he collected, every piece of his humanity that seemed to fall away, she felt responsible for all of it. The agents had told her that her false death would protect him, but from her distant vantage point, it looked more like it had destroyed him. 6 months ago, Elena explains, she made a decision. Her time in witness protection was technically voluntary after the RICO cases concluded 5 years ago. The threats had diminished. Many of Marco's old enemies were dead or imprisoned. She could leave the program, reclaim her identity, return to Italy. The FBI agents advised against it, warned her that the old families had long memories and that danger never truly disappears in their world. But Elena was tired of living as a ghost. She wanted to go home. She returned to Italy 3 months ago, settling in Florence because it was the only place that ever felt real to her. She knew the risks. She knew Marco still lived here. She told herself she would keep her distance, that she would stay hidden, that seeing Florence again would be enough. But in a city where she and Marco had shared so many memories, invisibility proved impossible. Tonight, going to that cafe was a mistake. She knew it was one of his regular locations. Some self-destructive part of her had wanted to be close to him even if he never knew. She had convinced herself she could sit in the same room with him, unseen in her new appearance, and satisfy the ache that had lived in her chest for 10 years. She had not expected him to recognize her. She had not expected their eyes to meet. She had not expected the world to crack open and swallow them both. As Elena finishes her story, silence fills the courtyard. The rain continues its steady percussion on the ancient stones. Marco processes what he's heard, and with each passing second, his initial shock transmutes into something else, a complex mixture of emotions he can barely name. Relief that she's alive, rage that she let him suffer, confusion about what this means for the future, and underneath it all, a grief perhaps even deeper than before, because he suddenly realizes he has mourned not just Elena's death, but also the 10 years they could have lived together. Marco finally speaks, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. He doesn't shout or accuse. Instead, he asks simple questions. Did she really think disappearing would protect him? Did she understand what her death did to him? Did she know that he became the very thing she had probably feared he would become? His questions aren't angry. They're devastated, each one landing like a confession of how broken he's been. Elena answers honestly. Yes, she thought it would protect him. No, she didn't understand the full cost. How could she? And yes, she watched him become darker, and it destroyed her to witness it from a distance, unable to reach him, unable to comfort him, unable to tell him that his grief was built on a lie meant to keep him safe. As they talk, something shifts between them. The initial shock begins to settle into something else, a tentative recognition that they are no longer the people they were 10 years ago. Elena is not the young woman who loved a dangerous man despite the risks. Marco is not the underboss who tried to keep his personal life separate from his work. They have both been changed by time and trauma, carved into new shapes by the years of separation. But underneath all the changes, something remains. When Marco finally steps closer, when his hand reaches out and his fingers brush her cheek, when Elena closes her eyes at his touch like she's been waiting a decade for this single moment of contact, they both feel it. The connection that made them love each other hasn't disappeared. It's been buried, distorted, complicated by lies and pain and lost time, but it still exists, a thread connecting past to present. Marco pulls her into his arms. Elena collapses against his chest, and they hold each other in the dark courtyard while the rain falls and the ancient city sleeps around them. No more words are necessary right now. This embrace says everything. Grief for the time lost, relief at the reunion, fear of what comes next, and underneath it all, a love that survived even death, or at least the illusion of death. But their moment of reunion is not private. Across the street, in the shadow of a doorway, someone watches. A man with a phone pressed to his ear speaks quietly in Italian, his words obscured by the rain but his intent clear. He has seen something important, something valuable, something that will interest the people he works for. When he ends the call, he slips away into the night, leaving Marco and Elena alone in their ignorance of the storm gathering around them. Because in the world Marco inhabits, information is currency, and the information that Elena Russo is alive, that Marco Vitale's dead love has returned, is valuable enough to restart a war. Morning breaks over Florence with the kind of harsh clarity that follows heavy rain. The streets are washed clean, the sky a pale blue, and the city looks almost innocent in the early light. Marco hasn't slept. After leaving the church courtyard, he brought Elena to a safe house he maintains in the Oltrarno district, a small apartment above a leather goods shop, unknown to anyone in his organization. They spent the night talking, filling in the gaps of 10 lost years, trying to reconcile the people they were with the people they've become. Elena told him about Portland, about working at the bookstore and living under a false name. She described the isolation of witness protection, how she had to sever all connections to her past, how she couldn't contact her elderly mother who died 3 years ago, still believing her daughter had been killed. She explained the small moments that nearly broke her, seeing couples walking hand in hand and remembering how she and Marco used to stroll along the Arno at sunset, or hearing certain songs that would transport her back to their apartment, or smelling specific foods that reminded her of their life together. Marco told her about the aftermath of her supposed death, how he spent the first year in a fog of grief so thick he barely remembers it, how he threw himself into the war against the Moretti family, with a recklessness that should have killed him but somehow didn't, how he rose through the ranks because men feared him, not just his violence but the dead look in his eyes that suggested he had nothing left to lose. He described becoming someone he didn't recognize, making decisions the old Marco would have found unconscionable, crossing lines he had once promised himself he'd never cross. He also told her about the loneliness, how he never got close to another woman, could never even consider it, how he turned his apartment into a museum of her memory, keeping everything exactly as she'd left it, how he went to her grave every year on the anniversary of the bombing and sat there for hours, talking to a headstone that marked an empty plot, how he blamed himself over and over for her death. If only he'd checked his car, if only he'd been more careful, if only he hadn't loved someone too deeply in a world where love is a weakness. As dawn breaks, they sit together on a small couch, Elena's head on Marco's shoulder, both of them exhausted but unable to stop touching, as if physical contact is the only thing proving this reunion is real. But Marco's mind is already working through the implications. In his world, information travels fast, and last night they weren't as careful as they should have been. Running through Florence's streets, embracing in the courtyard, it's possible someone saw them. And if the wrong people saw them, if word spreads that Elena Russo is alive, everything changes. Marco's phone buzzes. It's Dante, his lieutenant, calling much earlier than normal. Marco steps into the small kitchen to take the call, and what Dante tells him confirms his worst fears. Word is spreading through the underground. Someone saw Marco with a woman who looked like Elena Russo last night. The information is still just rumor, but rumors in their world have a way of solidifying into facts. Dante says people are asking questions. Old families that made peace with Marco years ago are suddenly interested again. The Salvatore family in particular. They lost 3 members in Marco's war against the Morettis and have never forgotten it. Dante's voice carries a warning. If Elena really is alive, if she's back in Florence, Marco needs to secure her immediately. The woman who died 10 years ago gave Marco a purpose. made him invulnerable because he had nothing to lose. But a living Elena? That's a vulnerability. That's a target. That's exactly what his enemies need to regain leverage over him. Marco ends the call and returns to the living room. Elena looks up at him, and she can read the tension in his face. She asks what's wrong, and Marco tells her the truth. Their reunion hasn't gone unnoticed. The world they live in doesn't allow for private moments or second chances. Her reappearance has already started to ripple through Florence's criminal underground, and those ripples will soon become waves. Elena's face pales. She asks the question Marco has been avoiding. What does this mean? Marco sits beside her and takes her hands. He explains that they have limited options. She can disappear again, leave Italy, return to witness protection or something similar, vanish before her presence here causes more complications, or she can stay. But if she stays, she becomes the center of a target, and Marco will have to go to war again to protect her. Elena pulls her hands away. Her voice is firm when she speaks. She didn't survive 10 years of exile and isolation just to run away again. She didn't return to Florence to hide. She understands the risks. She understood them when she made the decision to come back. If her presence here creates problems, then they'll face those problems together. She's done living as a ghost. She's done letting fear make her decisions. Marco recognizes the determination in her voice. It's the same strength that made him fall in love with her a decade ago. Elena was never the type to cower or accept protection passively. She had always been fierce in her own way, capable of staring down danger with clear eyes. But Marco also knows what she doesn't. The world has gotten more brutal in the years she's been gone. The old rules that used to govern their conflicts have eroded. Family loyalty means less than it once did, and violence has become more random, more savage. They spend the morning planning. Marco makes calls to his most trusted associates, people who owe him loyalty beyond the typical transactional relationships of organized crime. He moves Elena to a different safe house, this one more secure, in a fortified building in the Santo Spirito area. He assigns 2 of his best men to guard her, Luca and Alessandro, both veterans who have proven themselves in past conflicts. He tells them that Elena's safety is more important than his own, and they understand from his tone that this isn't hyperbole. Marco also reaches out to Tommaso Conti, an old-school don who functions as a mediator between the various families. Tommaso is in his 70s, respected by everyone, and one of the few people who can potentially broker peace when tensions rise. Marco requests a sit-down, a formal meeting where they can address the situation before it escalates. Tommaso agrees, setting the meeting for tomorrow evening at a neutral location. But not everyone wants peace. That afternoon, as Marco is coordinating security arrangements, violence arrives suddenly and viciously. A drive-by shooting targets the leather goods shop where Marco and Elena spent the previous night. The building is riddled with bullets. The shop owner, an elderly man named Pietro who had nothing to do with the criminal world, is killed, and 2 pedestrians are wounded. It's a message, brutal and clear. Marco's enemies know Elena is back, and they're willing to kill indiscriminately to get to her. Marco arrives at the scene 15 minutes after the shooting. Police are everywhere, cordoning off the area, taking witness statements. Marco stays back, watching from a distance, his mind calculating. The attack was sloppy, too public, too much collateral damage. This wasn't the Salvatores. They're more precise, more concerned with their reputation. This was someone else, someone hungrier and less restrained. Someone who sees Elena's return as an opportunity to advance themselves by taking down Marco. His phone rings. Unknown number. Marco answers, and a voice he doesn't recognize delivers a simple message. She came back from the dead once. Let's see if she can do it twice. The line goes dead before Marco can respond. That evening, Marco returns to Elena at the safe house. She's heard about the shooting. The news is all over local television. She looks at Marco with tears in her eyes and tells him she can't let innocent people die because of her. Maybe disappearing again is the right choice after all. Maybe her being alive is a curse rather than a blessing. Marco kneels in front of her, takes her face in his hands, and tells her something he's learned in 10 years of survival. Running doesn't stop predators. It just makes them chase harder. If she disappears now, his enemies will assume it's because she's a weakness he'll protect at any cost. They'll hunt her forever, certain that finding her will give them power over him. But if they stay and fight, if they face this threat directly, there's a chance to end it permanently. Elena asks how. How can they fight an enemy they can't even identify? How can they protect themselves from an entire underground that sees her as a target? Marco's answer is simple but terrible: by doing what he's always done. By being more ruthless, more strategic, more willing to cross lines than anyone else. By reminding Florence's criminal world why they learned to fear him in the first place. By turning defense into overwhelming offense. But there's a cost, and Marco knows it. The path he's describing will require him to become the darkest version of himself again. It will mean more blood, more bodies, more nights when he can't look at himself in the mirror. He thought he was done with that life. He thought 10 years of grief had burned out whatever part of him was capable of that level of violence. But looking at Elena, knowing she's alive and in danger, he realizes he was wrong. That capacity didn't disappear. It was just waiting for a reason to emerge again. Elena sees the change in his eyes. The way they go from soft to hard, from grief to determination. She understands what he's offering to do, what he's offering to become for her, and she makes her own decision. If he's going to fight, she won't be a passive victim waiting to be rescued. She'll stand beside him, help him, be a partner rather than a liability. She didn't survive a decade in exile just to hide behind him now. They hold each other as evening falls over Florence. Two people who have been given an impossible second chance, surrounded by enemies, knowing that the coming days will determine whether they get to keep the lives they've just reclaimed. Outside, the city lights begin to glow, beautiful and indifferent. And in various corners of Florence, other people are also making plans. Plans that involve Marco Vitale and the woman who came back from the dead. The game has begun, and no one knows yet how it will end. The sit-down with Tommaso Conti takes place in a private dining room at Enoteca Pinchiori, one of Florence's most prestigious restaurants. The location is neutral ground, sacred in the old traditions. Violence in such a place would be an unforgivable breach of the code that still governs some aspects of their world. Marco arrives with Dante, both men dressed in expensive suits looking like businessmen rather than criminals. The room is elegant, with crystal chandeliers and Renaissance paintings on the walls, creating an atmosphere of civilization that seems to mock the brutal realities they're here to discuss. Already seated are representatives from the major families still operating in Florence: Salvatore, Romano, and Marchetti. Tommaso Conti sits at the head of the table, his weathered face impassive, his hands folded on the white tablecloth. He's wearing a three-piece suit from another era, looking like a relic of times when their world had more honor, more structure, more predictability. Tommaso opens the meeting by acknowledging the situation. Elena Russo's return from the dead has destabilized the careful peace that has existed for the past 5 years. Her presence represents an uncertainty, a variable that makes everyone nervous. He asks Marco to explain what happened, how she's alive, what she's been doing for 10 years. Marco tells a modified version of the truth, enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing details that could endanger Elena further. He confirms she's back, she's under his protection, and he expects that protection to be respected. The response is mixed. The Romano family, represented by a younger Don named Enzo, seems indifferent. They've prospered in recent years and have no desire for conflict that would disrupt their operations. The Marchetti family, through their representative Lucia, a sharp woman in her 50s who runs their legitimate businesses, expresses concern about stability but not hostility. But Antonio Salvatore, sitting across from Marco, radiates barely contained rage. He's in his late 40s, scarred and hard, wearing his hatred openly. He lost 2 brothers in Marco's war against the Morettis, and while that war technically didn't involve the Salvatores, they got caught in the crossfire. Antonio speaks bluntly. Elena's return changes nothing about the past, but it creates new possibilities for the future. If Marco wants peace, he needs to offer something valuable in return for their restraint. Territory, money, concessions that acknowledge the Salvatore family's grief and loss. Marco listens without visible reaction. When Antonio finishes, Marco responds with equal bluntness. He will make no concessions based on threats. Elena is not a bargaining chip or a vulnerability to exploit. Any family that moves against her will face total war, not the limited rule-bound conflict of the past, but complete annihilation. He will burn their businesses, target their families, eliminate their allies, and salt the earth where their organization stood. He says this without raising his voice, without emotion, as a simple statement of fact. The room goes quiet. Tommaso intervenes, suggesting a cooling-off period. 2 weeks during which all families agree to conduct no operations against each other while tensions settle. It's a reasonable proposal, and most representatives agree. But Antonio Salvatore doesn't. He stands, buttoning his suit jacket, and delivers his own message. The dead should stay dead. If Elena insists on walking among the living, she should be prepared for consequences. He leaves the private dining room without another word. Dante leans close to Marco and whispers that Antonio just signed his family's death warrant. But Marco knows something his lieutenant doesn't. Antonio Salvatore didn't organize the drive-by shooting. His anger is real but controlled, bound by old codes. Someone else is moving in the shadows. Someone using the situation to advance their own agenda. Over the next 3 days, Marco investigates. He uses every contact, every information source, every favor owed to him across years of operation. He leans on bookmakers, corrupt police officers, nightclub owners, dock workers, the entire network of people who see and hear everything happening in Florence's underworld. And slowly, a picture emerges. The threat isn't coming from one of the established families. It's coming from within Marco's own organization. A lieutenant named Franco Messina has been quietly building his own power base for the past 2 years, recruiting younger members who see Marco as a relic, someone whose grief made him weak and distracted. Franco has been waiting for the right opportunity to make a move, and Elena's return provided it perfectly. He organized the drive-by shooting specifically to create chaos, to make Marco look vulnerable, and to position himself as the strong alternative. The revelation is both shocking and predictable. Marco has been so focused on external threats that he missed the rot developing inside his own operation. Franco is ambitious, ruthless, and smart enough to recognize that Elena, alive after 10 years, represents exactly the kind of distraction Marco doesn't need. If Marco gets killed protecting her, Franco steps into power. If Marco abandons her to maintain his position, he loses the respect and fear that have kept him alive. Either outcome benefits Franco. Marco shares this information with Elena at the safe house. She asks what he's going to do, and Marco tells her the truth. He's going to eliminate Franco before Franco can move against them. It's not what he wants. Franco has been part of his organization for 8 years, has proven himself capable and loyal until recently. But necessity doesn't care about preferences. In their world, betrayal has only one punishment. Elena suggests an alternative. What if they use Franco's betrayal as an opportunity? If Franco thinks Marco is distracted and vulnerable, why not let him believe that? Why not draw him into making his move prematurely, before he's fully prepared while Marco still has the advantage? It's risky, but it might allow them to end the threat with less collateral damage. Marco considers the idea. Elena is right. Franco is still positioning himself, still recruiting, still building towards something. If Marco strikes now, it will be preventive but messy, potentially splitting his organization into factions. But if he can force Franco to reveal himself fully, to commit to an attack before he's ready, Marco can destroy him completely and demonstrate to everyone else what happens to betrayers. They develop a plan. Marco will appear to lower his guard, focusing visibly on protecting Elena while seeming to neglect his organization. He'll move her to a more isolated location, a villa in the hills outside Florence, and station fewer guards there than warranted. He'll create the appearance of vulnerability, of being so consumed by Elena's return that he's making strategic mistakes. And then when Franco makes his move, Marco will be ready. The trap is set 3 days later. Marco moves Elena to the Villa Medici, a restored farmhouse in Fiesole with commanding views of Florence below. He assigns only 4 guards, enough to seem genuine, but few enough to appear penetrable. Then he spreads word through carefully chosen channels that he'll be at the villa that night, spending time with Elena away from the city's tensions. Franco takes the bait. Intelligence comes in through Marco's loyal contacts that Franco is mobilizing his people. He's bringing 12 men to the villa, planning to hit it after midnight when vigilance is lowest. He intends to kill Marco and Elena together, then claim the attack came from the Salvatore family, using the confusion to seize control of Marco's territory before anyone can challenge him. That night, as darkness settles over Fiesole, the villa appears quiet and unsuspecting. Lights glow warmly in the windows. The guards are visible at the perimeter, following predictable patrol patterns. Everything looks exactly as Franco would expect, a target waiting to be struck. What Franco doesn't know is that Marco has 40 men positioned around the villa, hidden in the olive groves and outbuildings, professionals who have been with him since the beginning. He's also notified a sympathetic police contact who will arrive exactly 15 minutes after the shooting starts, long enough for Marco to handle the situation, short enough to catch anyone who tries to flee. Franco's convoy arrives at 11:30. The men exit their vehicles quietly, moving with military precision. They're armed with automatic weapons, prepared for a quick, brutal strike. They advance on the villa, and when they're close enough that retreat becomes difficult, Marco's trap springs shut. The battle is short and savage. Floodlights suddenly illuminate the grounds. Marco's men emerge from concealment, creating a crossfire that catches Franco's people in the open. Some try to fight back, others attempt to run, but Marco's positioning has eliminated any escape route. The sound of gunfire echoes across the hills, birds exploding from trees in panicked flight. Marco himself doesn't participate in the shooting. He stands on the villa's second-floor balcony with Elena beside him, watching as his plan executes perfectly. When it's over, less than 5 minutes from first shot to final surrender, 8 of Franco's people are dead, 4 are wounded, and Franco himself has been captured alive at Marco's specific instruction. The police arrive as promised, collecting bodies and prisoners. The police captain, a man on Marco's payroll, will file a report describing a gang conflict that his department heroically interrupted. Franco will be charged with multiple murders, his organization dismantled, and the legal system will handle what remains. Clean, efficient, problem solved. But there's one more thing Marco needs to do. He goes down to where Franco is being held, hands zip-tied, blood streaming from a shoulder wound. Franco looks up at Marco with rage and despair, knowing he's miscalculated catastrophically. Marco kneels beside him and speaks quietly, so only Franco can hear. Marco tells Franco that he understands ambition, understands wanting more power and respect. But Franco made a critical error in his calculations. He thought Elena's return made Marco weaker, distracted, vulnerable. He was wrong. Elena's return didn't weaken Marco. It gave him something he'd lost 10 years ago. Purpose, clarity, a reason to be more than just the violent ghost he'd become. Franco mistook resurrection for weakness, and that mistake destroyed him. The police take Franco away, and Marco returns to Elena. She's shaken by the violence she witnessed, by the bodies on the villa grounds, by the brutal efficiency with which Marco orchestrated the ambush. This is the side of his life she understood intellectually but never experienced directly. Now she's seeing exactly what Marco meant when he said he would do anything to protect her. They don't talk about it immediately. Instead, they walk through the villa's garden away from the blood and chaos, into the quiet olive groves under a starlit sky. After 10 years of separation, after all the grief and transformation, they're finally at a point where they can imagine a future together. But it's not the future they would have wanted a decade ago. It's darker, more complicated, marked by violence and compromise. Elena asks Marco a question she's been avoiding. What kind of life can they possibly have together? He'll always be looking over his shoulder. She'll always be a target. They've both changed too much to simply resume what they had before. Is this reunion actually salvation? Or have they just condemned themselves to a different kind of suffering? Marco doesn't have a comforting answer. He tells her honestly that he doesn't know. Maybe they can find peace. Maybe they can leave Florence, start over somewhere his past won't follow. Or maybe they're trapped in a tragedy that death merely postponed by 10 years. But regardless of the outcome, he's grateful for this time with her. Even if it ends badly, even if danger always surrounds them, these moments together are more than he thought he'd ever have again. Elena takes his hand. She tells him something she realized during her decade in exile. Love isn't about perfect circumstances or guaranteed happy endings. It's about choosing someone even when everything is broken, even when the smart decision would be to walk away. She chose him 15 years ago knowing his world was dangerous. She chooses him again now, with even clearer eyes, understanding exactly what that choice means. As dawn breaks over Florence, they stand together watching the sun illuminate the ancient city below them. The villa behind them is being cleaned by Marco's people, evidence being removed, bodies being transported, the machinery of their dark world working efficiently to erase the night's violence. But here, in the garden, holding each other as morning arrives, they exist in a pocket of peace that feels miraculous given everything that threatens them. 3 weeks later, significant changes have occurred. Antonio Salvatore, after witnessing Franco's fall, has agreed to the peace Tommaso Conti originally proposed. The message was received. Marco will go to any lengths to protect Elena, and opposing him costs more than it's worth. The other families fall in line, recognizing that stability benefits everyone more than conflict. Marco begins the process of extracting himself from the organization. He promotes Dante to leadership, transferring territory and operations gradually but deliberately. It's a careful process. Walking away completely from his position would create a power vacuum that invites conflict, but maintaining direct control forever is unsustainable. The goal is a managed transition that maintains peace while giving Marco distance from daily operations. Elena establishes a new identity, legal this time, with documentation that can withstand scrutiny. She's no longer Sarah Mitchell from Portland, but she's not exactly Elena Russo either. She becomes Elena Vitale, Marco's wife, in a small private ceremony at the same church where they reunited. No guests, no celebration, just two people making a commitment to each other despite impossible odds. They purchase a small house in Fiesole, away from the city center, but close enough to maintain necessary connections. The house has a garden where Elena plants herbs and vegetables, reclaiming some of the domestic normalcy that was stolen from her. Marco spends his days managing the transition of power and his evenings with Elena, relearning how to be human rather than just a survivor. But they're not naive. Security remains tight. Guards are always nearby, though carefully disguised. Marco maintains relationships with key contacts who keep him informed of any developing threats. They vary their routines, stay vigilant, and never forget that their world doesn't offer permanent safety, only managed risk. 6 months after the villa ambush, on a warm spring evening, Marco and Elena sit in their garden watching the sunset paint Florence in gold and rose. They've just learned that Elena is pregnant, a complication they didn't plan for but that fills them both with terrified joy. A child changes everything, adds new vulnerability, requires them to think beyond their own survival. Elena asks Marco if he regrets it, not the child, but everything. Coming back, fighting for them, choosing this complicated, dangerous life over simpler alternatives. Marco thinks before answering. He tells her that regret is too simple a word for what he feels. There's grief for the 10 years they lost, anger at the circumstances that stole that time, fear for what the future holds. But underneath all of that is something else. Gratitude that she's alive, that they found each other again, that they get this second chance, however imperfect it may be. Elena says she feels the same way. Then she asks him the harder question. Was she right to come back? Did she choose correctly when she returned to Florence knowing it would create danger? Or would everyone, Marco, the innocent people killed in Crossfire, even herself, have been better off if she'd stayed in Portland, living as Sarah Mitchell forever? Marco's answer comes without hesitation. She made the only choice she could have made and still been herself. A life in permanent hiding, always pretending, never being real. That's not living, it's just slow dying. She came back because she needed to reclaim her existence, and if that choice created complications, those complications are worth it for the simple fact of being alive and being together. As stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, they sit in silence, holding hands. Their story isn't a fairy tale. It's messy and violent and marked by tragedy. But it's theirs, true and hard-won and more precious because of everything they sacrificed to have it. In the distance, Florence glows with evening lights, beautiful and ancient and indifferent to the small human dramas playing out within its borders. The city has witnessed countless love stories over centuries, some ending in triumph, others in tragedy, most in some complicated mixture of both. Marco and Elena's story is just one more thread in that vast tapestry. Two people who loved, lost, suffered, and somehow found each other again despite impossible odds. The future remains uncertain. Threats will emerge. Their child will be born into a world where danger is always present. They will make difficult choices and live with complicated consequences. But tonight, in their garden, watching stars emerge above Florence, they are together. And after 10 years of believing that would never happen again, together is enough. It's everything. The story ends not with resolution, but with continuation. Life goes on. Complicated, dangerous, precious. They have been given their second chance and they will fight to keep it, knowing that the fight itself is proof that they're alive, that their hearts, which were broken 10 years ago by a terrible lie meant to protect them, have found their way back to each other despite everything. In the end, maybe that's what resurrection really means. Not erasing the past or pretending death didn't happen, but choosing to live fully despite the scars, to love fiercely despite the risks, to embrace the messy, imperfect present rather than mourning what was lost or fearing what might come. Their story, of love, loss, and the long journey back to each other, becomes part of Florence's eternal collection of human experiences. And in a city that has stood for over 2,000 years, witnessing every possible variation of human joy and suffering, their story is neither unique nor insignificant. It simply is. Real, true, and ultimately, despite everything, hopeful. Thank you for experiencing this journey with Marco and Elena. If you enjoyed this story of love, survival, and second chances, please subscribe to our channel for more emotionally powerful narratives that explore the depths of human connection in a realistic and compelling way. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Until next time, take care of your heart and the hearts of those you love, because as Marco and Elena learned, sometimes the greatest miracle is simply being alive together.